So deciphering facelift terminology. Really great topic. Thanks for the recommendation. Let's take a beach walk. So if you've done any research into facelifting, you have probably been bombarded by all sorts of crazy terms that you aren't completely sure what they mean. And how can you be expected to be? Many of them are super complex medical terms. And so I'm going to try and break it down a little bit to make it easier to understand what we're talking about in terms of facelifting, what the terms mean, and which ones are important. So the first one to start with is the SMAS. SMAS is actually an acronym. It stands for Superficial Muscular Aponeurotic System. That's why we call it SMAS, because that's a terribly long name to remember. And what SMAS is it is the layer of fibrous tissue that envelopes all the musculature of the face. And it is extremely important because it is a natural embryonic fusion plane. So there's nothing important running directly in that layer. And you can transmit tension throughout the entire facial structure through that system. So the discovery of the SMAS layer revolutionized facelifting because previously all we had was pulling on skin, which wasn't very successful. It didn't last very long at all. And once we discovered the SMAS and that we could start pulling on that, then we could get a lot more comprehensive facial lift that lasted a lot longer. There are limitations to the SMAS. First off, the SMAS doesn't go through the whole face. It actually stops at the zygomaticus major muscle. So pulling on the SMAS, you're never going to get tension in this area. And secondarily, there's some tight little ligamentous junctures between the skin and deeper tissues throughout that SMAS layer that prevent the tension from being transmitted fully through. And addressing those ligaments is what we get with the deep plane. And so the deep plane is an acknowledgement that there's these main facial ligaments that hold or restrict movement in the SMAS. And in order to do a deep plane facelift, you need to fully release those ligaments so that the structures can be repositioned. When the deep plane facelift was first described by Hamra, he essentially stopped that lift at the jawline and then did a plication of the platysma muscle. The word extended comes into play. Andrew Giacono came up with the extended deep plane facelift, and he extended his SMAS dissection below the level of the mandible, about 5 centimeters underneath the platysma. And that releases an additional ligament, the cervical retaining ligament. So the extended deep plane facelift not only addresses the structures of the face, but also addresses the structures of the lateral neck and helps to get that nice, well-defined jawline and mandibular angle. Then a recent word has been added to facelifting, and that is preservation. And preservation is the acknowledgement that as we as surgeons have gotten better at dissecting in that deep plane, that we're mobilizing tissue beyond, far beyond where we're dissecting under the skin. And there's been studies that have shown that the skin actually looks much healthier when it isn't elevated just in that layer underneath the skin, the subcutaneous layer, but when the dissection is done in the deep plane and the whole skin, underlying subcutaneous tissue and fascia is elevated as a composite flap. And that's what preservation means, is that as much of those cutaneous attachments that can be preserved are being preserved to improve skin quality and overall give a better lift. So what does that mean? That means that the facelift I perform every day is technically a extended preservation deep plane facelift. That's a lot of words. And so that's why people have been so prone to renaming facelifts, just call mine the current lift because it's easier. But it is important. All those words mean something, and understanding them is an important component of knowing what sort of facelift you're getting. So I appreciate you coming with me on this beach walk. Please, if you have any other topics, leave them in the comments below. Have a good day.